like when they say raising is a full-time job, it pretty much is. So if you as the CEO, you need your team to work on everything else, but then you also need to work on building the relationships, getting investors on board, pitching. And then also as you move towards the pitching stages, I found it's not just the first pitch. We've had meetings with some VCs where it's been 3, 4, sometimes as much as 6 or 7 meetings.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Good for Profit. I am Mo, your host, and today's guest with us is also Mo. He is Mohamed Binesmael, CEO and co-founder at Route Konnect. They are the Google Analytics of physical spaces. Mo and I go back quite some years. We've known each other for a little while now. I know that he's been pouring his heart and soul into this startup, and it's so great to see it go from success to success. And I cannot wait for us to dive into the conversation we have lined up with us today. We talk about many things relating to the startup, the journey he's been through with his team, as well as how the technologies can be used, like analytical technologies can be used to help track things like emissions from traffic data and so on and so forth. So pretty interesting stuff. So let's dive right into it and I'll see you there.
So Mo, welcome to the podcast, my friend. Very happy to have you on board.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me on board and very much looking forward to it. Absolutely.
Yeah, me too. We've been trying to get this going for a while now. I think been planned for a couple of weeks. And you've made your journey all the way here from another city. So thanks for making it all the way.
Yeah, no, really appreciate it. It was, the moment you said that there was the opportunity to actually come in and do this in a space, I just wanted to check it out as well and see what that'll look like. And it's absolutely amazing. And so I'm very excited to be here.
That's awesome. So you're in London at the moment. Obviously, you're originally from Cardiff.
Yeah.
There, but you're in London at the moment to do some things around the business you're working on, which we're going to dig into a little bit more later as well. But the opening question that I like to kind of start with is a bit of a cliche question to ask, but I like to ask it anyway. And it's what motivates you? What's the thing that sort of gets you out of bed in the morning and that keeps you going despite coming over many hurdles, as I can imagine with your business?
Oh, very interesting. Yeah. What is it like? That is a very hard question. Because is it like motivations about life? Is it motivations about business? Is it
I mean, it could be a bunch of things, right? Because I say what is the one thing, but you're right. It could be a bunch of things. There could be about some business things that motivate you. There could be changes you want to see in the world. It could be really anything. But sort of, what are some of the things that kind of really motivate you to just keep going and get up and give it your best every day, kind of thing?
Yeah. So for me, I think there's a number of things. I think it's the experience of progressing through a journey with other people. I think that's really nice. Like just the experience of it is fantastic, and making some really good friends along the way. And then just building something that's so good, so out there, that can, I mean, this is probably cliche, but, make some sort of impact, but at the same time, so that you could be comfortable, I guess, in life. So that is one of the things I would say that just keeps you going, really.
The financial freedom,
that's one. Well, yeah, exactly. That's one huge element. I think, especially over the past year and a half, 2 years, we've seen so many changes happen, and so some sort of freedom to just be able to do what you want to do and pursue what you want to do. I think that's one element of it. And then doing that with friends, with people that you meet, and there's so many amazing people when you go out there, and I think those experiences are just amazing.
Wow, that's incredible. So very, very much driven by the people you meet and the networks that you make through it, but also you're building something that in the future will have a lot of positive returns for you as well.
Yeah,
excellent. And so your company, Route Konnect. So this is what the main thing that kind of the theme we want to talk around today. So I understand you started it around 2018.
Yes.
Officially, right?
Yeah.
And did it start as a project before you went into having it as sort of an official thing?
So it actually started as a response to a challenge during university. So I'd taken part in the Telegraph STEM Awards all the way back in 2016. Anyone at university doing undergraduate study should look at this competition. I don't know how it's currently going on now with COVID, but when we first started at it, and it really started to grow year on year. There's a grand prize of £25,000, and if you get to the finals, you win the pitching event. You get that amazing prize, and as a university student, who wouldn't want
of course,
a 5-figure sum. So that was, and essentially they ran 6 challenges, each sponsored by a different engineering or scientific background. So you had an automotive challenge, you had a building environment challenge, and me being a civil engineer in my background, I always gravitated towards the building environment. And in 1 year, in 2016, I applied, got as far with my idea of looking at augmented reality and construction, got as far as the semi-finals. So, they have thousands of applicants, and each of the sponsor companies have to pick 5 semi-finalists, and then you go to pitch to those sponsors, and the winner picked from the sponsor then goes to the final, and then you have a final of the 6 candidates, and then the final wins the final prize. So it's all these finals.
A lot of loops to jump through.
Yeah, exactly. So in 2016, I got to the semi-finals, didn't make it any further. And in 2017, there was a challenge around the smart city. How can we build a solution or a technical solution that can make our environment smarter? And I looked at solution around vehicle detections and what could we do to help improve efficiencies in our road network.
Brilliant.
And started, I had the understanding and the experience from the year before where I got to the semi-final, so I knew how to put a consistent application together that could hopefully get me to the semi-final stage, and then learn my lessons from last time around to put together a compelling pitch. It was like a 5-minute pitch, I think, and it took about 10 hours to really get the presentation together. And honestly, that's a theme that just continues even now to sales decks, pitch decks. It really takes hours and hours to get something that
looks really good, portrays the points very kind of like clearly.
Yes,
and
exactly.
And actually sells the company and the concept that you're trying to do.
It needs to look good. It really does. And sometimes that might mean, well, at that time I had some intricate animations. Because in person having those animations really help. Nowadays with COVID, I think animations are quite stuttery on video, so you really have to know what to go for. So I went through.
You went quite deep into this by the sound of it. You dug quite a lot into it.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. So and the idea at the time I'd looked into was putting these what was called piezoelectric sensors, basically like pressure sensors. Anytime they get triggered by pressure essentially and generate some sort of electricity, and then that can give you data about vehicle movements. Turns out that's actually a thing in roads anyway. But the idea still stood that I wanted to analyze what traffic movements were like so that we could affect the traffic lights in a way that could help improve the efficiency. And then it also help reduce either air pollution or at the same time energy use, because now as we're moving towards electric vehicles, there's the argument that it doesn't really matter so much now, although it'll probably still take a decade or two, so we'll still need efficiency improvements.
I mean, also the excuse me, also the more efficient the cars become, the better the longer the battery will last, and
exactly
you'll use, the better the battery life, and so on and so forth. So I mean, it's not. I think there's
it applies to electric vehicles just as much.
So that's where the idea was born, effectively, right?
Exactly. So that was in 2017. Got to the semi-finals. They loved it. Got to the finals. Unfortunately, didn't get to the very end, but there was a really strong cohort. Make some good friends along the way, and they were very awesome. So just the experience of actually getting to the final dinner, I think that was just as good as the final prize in some ways. Really enjoyed that, because that was that was
and you built a lot of connections there, I imagine, as well, that are probably helping you to this day.
So actually, as part of being in the finals, they provided support and mentorship with really experienced IP lawyer to help take the idea forward. And so as I was then graduating and continued a bit with the PhD, I was on the side also continuing the idea to see how far I could take it. And that's when I decided to officially launch it, because at one point, it was probably the third item in my priority list. But all of a sudden, I started to see some interesting traction behind it, invitations to certain accelerators.
Okay.
And this one was to Dubai. And so,
Wow.
it looked really serious. And
Yeah,
so,
wow.
if that much interest is going behind it, I should probably look into it and take it a bit more seriously.
It sounds very exciting.
Yeah, absolutely.
And this was still back in 2017. It was all part of the
This is now
competition
2018.
Okay,
Yeah.
right. And and the whole thing that led to it was the competition that was run by the university, and that's nationwide, right? That's not
It was by the Telegraph.
By the
Them awards,
Telegraph.
Yeah.
Perfect,
So
perfect.
they ran it for universities.
Okay,
So
I
anyone,
see.
at any university in the UK could apply.
And how did you find out about that competition?
It must have been some sort of email or newsletter. You have to really look
read
out.
your emails, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
read your emails, because sometimes you see these things and you think they're spams, or like,
Yeah.
£10,000 prize, £25,000 prize, and I think those ones are probably real.
Okay.
I think there's this adage
If it's
that
$1 million, maybe not. But if it's 25K, then maybe yes.
maybe, yeah.
Sure.
So
Wow.
yeah, I mean, just look at and actually maybe it's too many maybes, but after hearing this sort of podcast, look into any competitions, just Google them and see if there's competitions in your areas, because there's bound to be some kind of competition out there, particularly in the UK, where you can submit ideas or thoughts and pitch for them, and then get prizes at the end for them, and there's so many out there.
And did you have the idea for the business in mind back then, or was it just sort of, I'm interested in this area, in this field, and there's a competition? Hell, why not? I'm going to apply and see where it goes.
The second one, yeah, exactly.
The last-
So
okay.
it was, there's this competition. I actually wasn't sure whether to do something around roads or whether to do something around the buildings themselves and make it more efficient within the building, and decided to settle on the road side of things, because that was very prominent as we were looking at autonomous vehicles as well. So building out the vision, it was actually, by the end of this 10, 20-year play, you could coordinate autonomous vehicles to really maximize efficiency in our road network.
Okay.
And so that is how the concept started. It had, obviously, before that, benefits to other elements like coordinating emergency vehicles,
Sure.
Reducing pollution by prioritizing public transport. And that's the idea that I then took to the accelerator.
Right. Right. I see.
But I learned, had a lot of lessons from the accelerator. We were a very young startup, actually, the youngest going into it.
Wow.
I
I mean, you'd only been around for a year at the time, and they
No,
flew you-
even 5 months.
Wow.
Yeah,
So-
officially.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. And so,
And they flew you out to Dubai, right?
yeah, so it all sounded like
Do you
a
want to tell us a
scam.
bit more about that? Yeah. It all sounded like a scam.
Because all the correspondence was through a Google email. So,
Oh, okay. Wow.
yeah, it was very interesting. And I tried to look online into it as well, because at that point we were the 5th cohort, but I couldn't find much information about the previous cohorts.
Okay.
And so, you get this
Very secretive. That
yeah.
there's a personal email from a Gmail account messaging you. I mean, it takes a leap of faith.
It does, yeah.
Carry
Well,
on with that.
and there's a funny story behind that, because our then co-founder at the time, ex-military, so he booked his flight sooner than mine.
Okay.
So I thought, well, he can find out first. Let me know if anything's gone wrong.
And since he's ex-military, so he'll have a bit of insight.
He'll be able
how
to take
go,
care
yeah.
of himself. let us know if the actual hotel was real. It was.
Okay.
So,
okay.
two
Thank
months
goodness for that.
stay, and yeah, absolutely. So
So you're out in Dubai for 2 months.
Yes.
working. Wow, that's
yeah,
brilliant. Wow.
it was a really funded accelerator, because it was by the government, right?
Brilliant.
So they're really keen on bringing ideas and concepts to Dubai and look at implementing them across their government entities. So we were looking at Dubai Police, but the accelerator had, I think, 11 or 12 entities. You had, the water
Wow.
entity, education. And so it was a really good
Wow.
mix of other companies that we could work with and see. Learn lessons from. So for me, that was absolutely amazing.
That is brilliant. And at the time, did you already have your co-founders before the accelerator?
Yeah. So initially, because from my end, it was quite complex.
Sure.
Because so there we had 2 co-founders, one with electrical and electronic engineering background, another with computer science.
And did you meet them all through university, through local meetups? What was the...
For mine, everyone I'd met was through the university. So we'd either worked on projects together or I'd pitched at a university, either gathering or some sort of, again, another prize. So there was a university prize for like $3,000. And so I pitched for that. And that's how I met one of the co-founders there.
Brilliant.
The others I'd met through the Formula Student autonomous program that we were looking at running. So I'd been part of Cardiff Racing for a few years prior to that, but I could see that the direction that the competition was taking was that it would introduce autonomous self-driving racing vehicles, essentially. And so I wanted to create a team to get ahead of the curve. The competition had already started in Germany. I knew it was going to come to the UK at some point. It did come to the UK a year later. So, we had a team ready.
Well timed.
Yeah, very, very well timed. So I was really happy that we could get a team together. But that's where I met the other co-founders was through that.
So you'd worked together on other projects first. You kind of got to know each other there. You could tell you could work together and so on and so forth. And then you sort of spoke to them about this idea.
We'd gone our own separate ways for a year, but then came together again after that. So, went out to Dubai. That was a really good experience, also to learn from some of the other experienced startups that were way ahead of us. And then from there, had some lessons about how to pivot, because even though the concept itself was great in terms of reducing emergency response times, some of the challenges pointed in our direction were, how could we prove that it wouldn't adversely affect the rest of the network and the rest of the traffic situation? And so we still had a lot of work to do before we could think this sort of big element. And actually, this is part of this book, The Amazon Way on IoT. One of the lessons is think big, but start small. Right. So, how could you break it down to start on a very small level and then work your way towards that big vision? So came out of that thinking, right, rather than needing this entire network effect where you instantly plop all the infrastructure you need into a city, which actually China did in one of their cities, and they've shown that doing that helped reduce emergency response times by 50%.
Wow.
So that's
a lot.
It's huge. High. It's very high, yeah. And so, we can work towards that goal, but perhaps start a bit smaller by doing it on a junction and
it needs to be on a government level, right? If you're gonna, because essentially what you're doing is you're putting sensors into roads and into different places around where it's important to have those sensors, I suppose.
Yeah.
They track traffic, and then based on that data, you do a bit of magic and.
Yeah, so that's one element to it. But actually, there are private arms that are interested also in traffic data. So that was for us another way that we could look into getting into the market, which was looking at transport surveyors, looking at consultancies, because anytime you have development projects, you need to understand vehicle and pedestrian flow movements. And right now we're seeing a heavy push towards active travel and sustainable modes of travel, and introducing safe spaces for cyclists, e-scooters and the like, as well as pedestrians, of course. So we're seeing a lot of cycleway schemes popping up. And so really we do need to understand how that space is being used and what are the safety levels like. And so the other element is that transport surveyors are also interested in analyzing that road space. And that's another way for us to get in immediately into the market, demonstrate our case studies, demonstrate our proof points, and then build our way as we get those proof points.
And it's easier to work with the private side than it is to work with the government entities, right?
The government entities, it takes time. You have to build a relationship. You have to demonstrate, competence. And of course, because it's public money. So from their side, they're not going to necessarily risk putting funds and public funds into startups, perhaps, if you don't have the backing behind you. And, the whole thing from our side is building that backing for us. And so we managed to do that through the accelerators, through case studies, like you can start trials, you can start pilots, and through that you build that credibility for your startup.
Brilliant. And then you use that sort of headway to then go to governments and say, look, we've got the backing, we've got the contracts in place, proof of concept is there. Essentially the risk you're taking is actually not that big because it's been proven effectively.
Exactly.
Brilliant. And competitions played quite a big role for you there, as I understand. So not just working with early companies or trying to win early contracts, but going through competitions, that was one of the really big things for you.
Yes. Yeah, that really helps. I think you can only do that for so much, because I probably have a bad habit of just doing competitions and
too many competitions.
Yeah. So there is a limit.
Pareto efficiency kind of thing.
Yeah.
Just like do the bit that will really give you the most.
I think
outcome.
Really what I've actually learned over the past 2 to 3 years is the focus should be on getting customers and getting input from those customers. Because those, they're going to be the ones that actually pay for your products and for your solution, and they have the pain points.
Okay.
And so even though I'd been trying to do that through the competitions, it's not until someone actually pays for it that that it is a proof point for you that you are going in the right direction. Okay. And we still need to get towards that point, and we're very close, because part of the element for us is that we're working on essentially on a deep tech. Well, not so much deep tech, but it's computer vision analytics and a lot of machine learning. So we had to work on the back end for a year
lot first before we could actually get anywhere.
Yes, yeah. So we had to work on that for a year to year and a half before we had that ready to demonstrate.
Sure.
And as soon as we started to demonstrate that, get a demo together, which is the next step if you're looking to get investment into the company as well as the customers on board, is having a physical demo that, when I say physical, like a demo that's in front of you could be on a computer, that you can demonstrate it, but having some kind of demo,
working prototype.
A working prototype, exactly, yeah. And that's really important to build, even if it takes you 2 to 3 weeks, or just build something in that time to demonstrate how it would look like. And that gets people really interested because that's something tangible in front of them.
Brilliant. Okay, so I'm really enjoying this journey we're kind of walking through to get from how it all came about to begin with. It was a project while you're at university, and then working all the way through to applying to competitions. It becomes a bit more serious. You've got co-founders on board and so on and so forth. And I want to sort of carry on with this journey until kind of to get to where we are now, and then maybe I'll dig a bit more into some of the challenges you had on the way and so on and so forth. So you finished the Dubai Accelerator with your co-founders, and then you applied to some more competitions after that, came back to to Cardiff.
Yeah.
Right, to Cardiff, yeah. And then maybe can carry on talking us through the journey, so up to where you are now, essentially, with the startup.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'd then started applying to grant applications, because I did also start looking for investors to try to take the idea forward. And at that point, we were still very early stage. Now, I look back at those presentations, I still think, that was not the greatest of presentations.
I mean, that's a good thing. It means you're learning, right?
Absolutely.
You're evolving, so yeah.
Yeah, so tried those pitches. I got a lot of advice to actually apply for government grants. So I did those applications, there was a grant for £5,000 to get some support, and then there was a bigger one for £30,000. So that really helped us take things forward. And then COVID hit straight away. So we were in the middle of working on that sort of solution. And actually by that point, we've pivoted away from these piezoelectric sensors to looking at utilizing LiDAR, and that's what we got support for the grant.
Sorry, could you maybe just elaborate a little bit more on what that is for?
So LiDAR is essentially, if you know radar, but with lasers. So you ping out a laser, it bounces back, and that tells you,
distance
to an object that it hit.
Sure.
And from that, we could then tell what the vehicle flow was like underneath the road. So rather than digging into the roads to put sensors, let's put sensors above the road so that we can retrofit it to existing sensors, to existing infrastructure, make it much more cost effective to upgrade either road networks or other networks that were using tech that were put into the road, and that's just really costly to dig up and maintain.
Brilliant.
And so
makes sense.
So we moved to LiDAR, and then that was what we were working on in the grant. And part of the way that we would then look at validating the LiDAR was by using cameras. And so we sort of came to the conclusion by the end of that, why not drop the LiDAR element and just do the camera bit?
Just use the cameras.
Because there's so many, there's about 770 million cameras worldwide.
And you can tap into that footage.
You could tap into that resource. So long as you are compliant with GDPR and privacy. And that's something that we wanted to ensure that we would be compliant with that. And so started developing algorithms for analyzing movements anonymously across multiple cameras.
Brilliant.
So that's where we came to in terms of the technical
Okay.
background. And yeah.
So building the back end, building the software that would be able to take that data and bring something useful out of it, which, as you said, is deep tech, machine learning, building some crazy algorithms
Exactly.
that can really learn as they go along as well and figure out what's going on.
And then off the back of that, build a SaaS platform, so software as a service that
Brilliant.
customers can access, regularly and start building a startup that can scale.
Wow, it's really interesting how you've gone through all those ideas and sort of they develop over time. Your earlier prototypes were they required a lot of heavy work to go in to actually get them put into the infrastructure and so on. But over time, you sort of constantly improve and you kept going. So it took you about 3 years-ish, 3.5 years, 3 to 4 years, let's say, to get to this point now.
Yes,
Right.
3 years. I would say 3 years, because then we started pitching for the third time. As so I'd had rounds of pitching. First time around wasn't so great. Second time around was better, but still not as great. Third time around, we started to hit the mark in terms of our messaging and getting our messaging across. And particularly regulation timing. I think that plays a really huge part.
I mean, in your area, absolutely. So some businesses don't have to worry too much about that, but it's in here where there's a lot of. It's a much bigger thing. It's sort of it's something that's ultimately really guided by the government. It's not just, for example, like creating an app that's a D2C app like TikTok or something. There's a huge element of what is the government willing to invest in to actually get this thing going, right?
Yeah, I think that's one element of it. I think the other element is also what is the government going against. So for us, we started to notice governments, particularly in the West, so in the US, in the UK, actually even parts of Europe, looking at banning facial recognition technology, or where that technology was becoming unlawful in court judgments.
Right.
So we were seeing examples of that, and so we could incorporate that into our messaging because our solution was completely anonymized from the get-go. And so we don't look at collecting, private data or biometric data about a person. We're just interested in what are the actual movements like so that we can improve that space or improve the efficiency in that space.
And then with that, you can go perhaps beyond vehicles and into other areas too, I suppose.
Oh, exactly. Yeah. So, I mean, we're applying this primarily to transport, but this applies to so many sectors.
Other domains.
And retail, event management.
Everything really. Wow. It's very powerful.
Yeah. So in that regards, what is the vision of the company is sort of to become this number one smart city analytics provider. We're no way near there yet, but it is a case of building towards that because the what's different for us is rather than us coming at a specific technological solution, we actually have a broad technology that can be applicable to so many areas. And so if you can start to bring together all these different use cases in such a way, you can start to make it much more cost effective as a solution to whoever's willing to adopt this in a city space.
Brilliant. So it really is a much bigger piece here then. And the SaaS play makes a lot of sense for you because you can, it works everywhere across the board. You can get the big government contracts with that, but you can also get the sort of more private retailers and so on and so forth.
Exactly.
Brilliant. So it's taken you quite a while to get there to where you are now. And you're still a team of the 3 co-founders at the moment? Or
That's right, yeah.
Okay, brilliant. Any exciting news? Anything cool right now that's happening?
Yeah, I would have loved to actually have really exciting news because we're actually in the middle of an investment round.
Brilliant.
And,
okay.
it's been in the making now for 3 to 4 months.
Okay.
And usually these things take so much time.
Yes. More so than people realize.
Yeah, absolutely. It really. And right now, in terms of our funding round, so we initially were targeting 500,000 in total. One of our VCs recommended that we actually, particularly in our space where sales cycles can be a bit long, rather than work towards a 12-month runway, why not go for an 18-month runway? So we then pushed our target up to 720K, managed to achieve that at the moment, and then we're oversubscribed, so we decided to overfund.
Brilliant.
But right now, I still can't go into too much depth because we're in the legal discussions of it.
Of course.
There's a number of things that we need to do on the legal perspective, so making sure that we get that through, and then after that perhaps we'll look at the actual details of.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
Congratulations. That's
Thank
really,
you.
really, really great news. And yeah, looking forward to hearing more in the future when everything's closed and done and you've got that sorted.
Yeah, and actual focus on the business building side
Yeah,
of things. And
absolutely.
of course, then future rounds. And so getting the investor relationships built ahead of time for that as well.
Of course. So you've got a plan ahead for the next round as soon as this round is over almost.
Yeah.
Brilliant. And this is really useful for anyone who's listening who's sort of like a first-time founder or thinking about starting their own business, right? Because they can kind of just get to understand on more of a casual level what sort of things actually go into building a startup and how sometimes I think people sometimes build in their minds this idea, and I definitely did this myself, that it's very systematic, that you can really methodically go after starting a company or whatever. But I think what you realize as you see more and more examples is that it's a lot more messy than you think it will be. And it's like there are some timeless lessons and things you can apply, but at the same time, like to have a specific system that you can go through bit by bit and build a specific company, it doesn't quite work just like that. There's a lot of decisions you have to make on a regular basis that you might not have anticipated ever having to make.
Yeah,
Right.
I think I think what can help is actually having signposts.
Uh-huh.
So that can to say, right, get customers on board, number one.
Yeah.
Because traction is what is going to interest investors. If you're even looking for investors, actually sometimes the best way of running the business is to bootstrap completely and generate profits from the revenue and feed that back into the company and just grow organically. And so if you can actually avoid having to seek external investment, that's probably your best course of action. But of course, in some businesses, that's not feasible because you really do need to build a huge team to succeed, and that requires that initial startup capital.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, I think today there is a certain standard that people expect from any new company. So I think you can get away with a bit less now, even from example from the side of UI or UX. You could get away with building something really scrappy, maybe 10, 20 years ago.
Yeah.
Now the baseline of how good it has to be before it can be regarded as a potential option for other companies. Yes, MVP all the way, make it as scrappy as possible and put it out there, but it has to be something that's usable by the prospective customer. And that baseline seems to be sort of going up bit by bit as time goes by, because people get more and more used to incredibly smart tech and really nice user experience from apps they use. And so there is almost this expectation that actually I'm not going to switch over if it's only going to be 1.5 times better than what I have. Give me something that's 5x better, then I'll consider it, kind of thing. So if you can do that, maybe the UI and the UX can suffer a little bit. That's not a problem. But again, there has to be that baseline of it's good enough for me to actually consider it as a prospective customer. And that's a really important thing, I think, for startups to consider, because that investment can help then in that case. But what seems to me a little bit unusual about what you're doing is that you're going, so is this your first, you've got grants already, right? But this is officially, would you say, your first round, your seed, or have you raised?
It's complicated. I was hoping it would all be in one round, but
Right.
we had one VC that was really keen to come in very early on.
Yeah. Okay.
This was a few months ago. And actually, so there's elements when you come to thinking about your startup, especially around tax breaks for investors.
Sure.
Particularly around SEIS and EIS schemes, so Seed Enterprise Investment Scheme and the Enterprise Investment Scheme.
Which definitely, if you don't know what those are, just type it into Google, look into it, because they're very much expected by investors, but also they'll help you massively, and it will make you pitch better.
Absolutely, and actually getting government approval, but then at the same time, to get government approval, you need to have an interest investor. So there's this sort of chicken and egg situation, yeah. And the other element as well, which is a big lesson that I learned, and so I was actually given a wrong path by the conversations from the very early investors 2-3 years ago,
right,
who said go for grants, which is that grants eat up into de minimis funding, and your SEIS remaining amount also includes the de minimis grant funding. So you have limits on SEIS.
Okay.
So there's a limit of 150,000, right? 150,000 pounds. And if you received any grants, that eats into your SEIS limit.
Right.
And so the remaining limit that an investor might be keen for is going to be less.
Okay.
Whereas if you get the SEIS first,
Yep.
you can still hit your 200,000 euros de minimis limit after that, and it doesn't go the other way around. And so actually,
So get approval first before you even go for grants.
get investment first before grants,
Before
or
grants.
get the very early investment.
Okay.
Because-
Because this is what strikes me as a little bit odd, is that you're going for VCs straight away rather than going for angels. Is that partly why? Because they're more interested in EIS rather than SEIS, or because
Some VCs are also interested in SEIS. Very early stage VCs. You can look them up. There's I think in the UK probably 20, 30 of them
okay.
that you can message and pitch towards, and then angels as well. But I think it is a very difficult balance. It really depends on where you are and how much capital you need, because sometimes you can get an angel that is, or a syndicate of angels that can come in
With
very
that.
early on.
Sure.
You might not need that much capital, but the sort of capital that we were looking at, we did.
You needed VC in there, effectively. Fair enough. Interesting. Okay, so this is where you are now. Great news. It's exciting. You've got initial traction from customers, right? You've sort of gone out there, tested your product, still building it, getting investment in. What have been some of the challenges on the way? What have been maybe? Let's start with that. So you've already alluded into some of them. For example, like making the wrong turn at some point, going for grants because you were given that advice, but without the specific advice of how to go about it.
Yeah. And actually it did help. So, we did have the grants, and actually that process did help us continue things forward. So it wasn't necessarily to say that it was a bad thing.
Sure.
But just something to be mindful of when you make the decision.
Okay, brilliant. And that's a very nice little gold nugget there for people. But also maybe another lesson there is to just dig a bit more into what you're about to do.
Yeah.
Do a bit more research into how does that getting a grant, does that affect me in some way? Maybe like a small risk analysis, although you have a million and one things to do already anyway, and that's going to be hard to fit in, but it is what it is. What have been some of the biggest challenges that you've come across, just thinking back from that earlier part of the journey where it was just a project starting out all the way to kind of where you are now?
Yeah. For me, building tech is what I've witnessed is that building tech is hard, and it can be a bit more of a science than an engineering thing, because you can't say, in 6 months, this is going to be completely ready and we can start hitting the stores. Particularly in computer vision and our space, there's a lot to work with to try to get right. And so we tested that through accelerators, and that's how we start to initially verify and validate that the technology we were building is going in the right direction. And so when you're looking at building a hard tech startup, particularly that requires science as a background, you need to find the right people first and foremost. And,
right.
and actually, for me, building those relationships through university, and especially at projects like autonomous racing vehicles, was a really good way of finding that talent. And so that's one element. And the other element is that it will still take time. Sometimes it's a case of you just can't predict when it'll be ready. You just need to be able to work on it in the background. And perhaps at the same time, drumming up interest, getting a waiting list, getting a demo together. And then as that's built, really taking it forward with customers, actually starting to test it. And that's where we're at in terms of with customers, is actually putting it out there, and then working towards monetizing and actually getting working towards like then paid pilots and paid projects. That's the ultimate goal.
So it's more sort of early traction now that's non-paid for the time being, but just getting those early customers in.
Exactly.
Right. Brilliant. Okay, so sounds like another challenge to me then from all of that is time. Sounds like there's a lot to do.
Yeah, so if you're going to build a business, probably have savings, or don't quit your day job just yet, because it takes a lot. And I was probably really bad at that. In terms of managing that, I would say, it does drain more time than you actually think it would. And maybe the biggest thing that you need is persistence. I mean, I've probably been persisting at it for like 3 years, and it's still, now we're starting to see
some fruits of your labor.
Yeah, the inflection point starting to happen, particularly around the conversations with customers, and particularly around actually starting to get something out there that customers can use.
Okay, yeah. Okay, so persistence, definitely something there. The time, just to be able to manage your time well. So could you tell us a bit more about how you did that yourself in terms of actually having money to live and survive as well as build the business?
Yeah, I mean, I'd started freelancing on the side as well, although that wasn't bringing in as much because also COVID hit at the same time.
And what did you freelance in?
So for me, it was presentation designs. So that
makes
was
a lot of sense.
yeah, exactly.
You did go into a lot of detail in that. So
Yeah. So there we go. You can the skills that you build,
Yeah.
you can perhaps consult in that or freelance in that. So that can be a really thing that helps. I was teaching as well at university, and then I'd also freelance in technical writing, so be it scientific articles or
you've done a lot of that anyway for your degree, so might as well make use out of that.
Yeah, so I'd had an article published as part of my first year in PhD, so that was really nice, and so I could use that experience and
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Okay, I want to jump into sacrifices. So you mentioned PhD.
Yes.
Did you carry on with that?
I was on interruptions of study.
Okay, brilliant.
So the university was really supportful in that regard. They could see the potential for where I was taking things. Obviously, I've probably, I don't know how far I've taken that, because every year it would be a case of things are really getting interesting with the startup.
Sure. So you did you sort of push it back another year.
Yeah.
Okay.
But obviously that has its limits, and
of course.
Well, that's an ongoing thing right now, so I probably can't dive too much into the details.
No problem. So I mean, you don't have to. But it's just interesting because one of the things that I think is quite important to understand before you sort of, I mean, there's a bit of naivety that helps when you're starting out, because it's like, you kind of don't want to know how hard it might be, and just jump into it and get it done. But at the same time, just to be ready to sacrifice some things that you may need to. And other people we've sort of spoken with have mentioned things like social time, sort of sacrificing some of that just to like work a little bit harder, a little bit more. Others sacrifice sleep. In your case, you could have carried on with your PhD, but decided, you know what, I'm going to put that on the side for now, just to sort of carry on with the startup.
For me, I like sleep is super important, so there's no way I'm sacrificing that.
There's no way. Okay. That's a very important element.
Yeah.
I mean, it's good that you know that. That's brilliant. Yeah, I think I read Why We Sleep, and ever since I don't actually read that. I sort of like looked into he had a course on masterclass that's basically exactly the same thing as the book, but it's Netflix style, so it's a bit just quicker to digest. And it was really interesting because I've always looked at sleep and thought, nah, sleep doesn't matter. Like I'll sleep 5 hours and it's okay. I can function. It's all good. And then when you actually start digging a bit more into the science, you realize, you know what, sleep does really help. And ever since prioritizing sleep more, you start to notice a difference of sort of how you function in daily life.
Definitely. I mean,
really
I started using these apps, that really help with the sleep, to understand what sort of quality of sleep was I getting and how many hours of sleep did it take for me to get there. So for me, I could... the best sleep that I would get would be after 8 hours and 40 minutes. It's a long time, but for me, like that would be almost like 99% quality. And then, I could function below that if needs be. So that could be as low as 6 hours, 40 minutes, so that would be my minimum if I needed it. If I go below that, I would know that I'm not going to have so much of a productive day the day after. But usually it's then 90-minute intervals between those numbers, essentially, for me.
Okay. Interesting. And say you had a time machine, another cliche question. Say you had a time machine, you could go back, change one thing in the earlier stages of starting this out, whether it was a project, whatever, even just the idea that you had, and you could just change one thing. What would that be?
Oh, that's very interesting. You've put me on the spot.
And you'd come back, so you don't have to go through it again. So it's a time machine where you can just go change it, come back kind of thing.
Yeah. So I'd initially had this idea very early on to be in the road space and work towards replacing the infrastructure in a way that is more efficient with the solution that we now have.
Right.
I'd pivoted into other areas and, we were trying to find a fit, like a product market fit.
Sure.
And then we sort of circled back a year and a half later on this idea again. And actually, it's turning out, that this is really the way we should be taking it forward. And either if I'd persisted in that area or found the right communication to achieve that, because what ended up happening this year was that we got in on this program, actually at the end of last year, 2021, we got in on this program, and that's when we started to get that conversation going again and actually speak to the right people. And that's when we found, actually this was a huge fit. And
the problem the first time around was that you were speaking to the wrong audience, but not necessarily that the idea was bad.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So if you could go back, you'd try more audiences first before pivoting.
Yeah. It's just finding the right decision makers, because the audience that we're looking at here is actually a huge one, and sometimes you find areas where they almost own the market in a way, and it's actually finding the right people to speak in that are running those markets.
And how did you go about that, finding those decision makers?
So for us, it was through, again, applying to more competitions. And
there's a recurring theme here.
Yeah. So more competitions, and through those competitions, getting grant projects again. So that's been the route that actually has been helping us. And actually, it's actually through that grant project that we were getting workshop set up and customer conversation set up to understand the problem and pain points. And actually, it was through that conversation with this particular customer, like prospective customer or stakeholder, that we started to unravel that the problem that we'd initially looked at is actually a real problem.
Okay, brilliant. Do you have a system for that at all, like a process for those conversations and kind of doing that sort of thing? Or is it just as it comes up with just trying to ask the right questions?
I think asking the right questions, and there's books for that, like the MOM test. I think that's a really huge element. And the lean customer
development.
That's another good book that has
purple cover, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. So those sort of books help because it helps provide a framework and a structure. I think in terms of looking at overall strategy, there's a number of things like the lean model canvas, the lean startup, and actually also blue ocean strategy. I think not many use that, but that is
not many use that. It's true. Interesting. But I keep seeing it more and more recently, where people talk about the importance of a blue ocean strategy in a way.
Yeah, it's how to differentiate yourself, and they provide a framework and a structure for going about doing that, and it's how you analyze certain factors in all the other companies in a market space that you're looking to enter, and you sort of create the shapes of what those companies look like, and for you to differentiate, you just need to have a different shape, and I think that's really intuitive to follow.
Brilliant. How much do you rely on your intuition in business?
Yeah, I think it's hard to say, because if you just rely on intuition, you could be going down wrong paths. And I'm not experienced enough to know what is the right way, what is the right path to go down. And so it's just experimenting and testing things out, and maybe having this naivety to it and persistence to it as well, to just go down a particular thread and see where it takes you.
Just being hard-headed and saying, no, I'm not going to do anything else. I'm just going to do this, and I'm going to believe in myself with this thing.
Yeah.
And if it's my vision, it's my vision. If it's wrong, it's wrong. Doesn't matter. I'm just going to kind of go with it and see where it takes me.
Yeah. And I probably sometimes have a bad habit as well of like hedging my bets with certain things. And actually sometimes as a startup, you do need to just focus on one particular thing.
Sure.
And so the way you would know to do that is when you start to get traction behind it. And I think the biggest telltale traction is when you're starting to generate revenue for it.
Brilliant. One of the final questions then, as we start sort of to wrap this up, what would you say has been your biggest strength that's helped you along the way?
Yeah, probably the biggest is being naively persistent.
Okay.
It's
sure. It's not applying to competitions?
Yeah, well, that too. Yeah, maybe that's part of the naivety, right? That you'd think you'd always win, because now we've got in on some programs where it's like the 1% that got through. And you know, I'd applied to numerous. If I showed you a folder list, there's like all these competitions I've entered, and probably only got into a good 5 of them, and actually then 3 or 4, you know, actually really got into the finals and made it through to the next stage of it. And so, yeah, it's sometimes particularly with startups, it is a numbers game. And even with, again, speaking to investors, to prospective customers, you just have to go out there, perhaps cold call, do all these things and actually just put yourself out there, and being naive to the process in that you just don't give up too early into it.
Okay, brilliant. And is there anything else that you'd want to say to either first-time startup founders or to early-stage founders right now?
Yeah, this is a difficult one. It's because I thought, you know, coming into starting the startup, because I'd been doing well at university, doing well at the PhD, you know, that it would go smoothly with like, yeah, this is what we do.
I've got the grades.
Yeah, exactly. And it just does not work that way at all. It like, you know, you need to build something, and you need to, it's more of the soft skills of selling and getting something out there and showing that it is, you know, you're building something that does tackle a pain point for people and they're really keen to adopt it.
Okay.
And I think going out there and in terms of solving a problem for a particular niche or for particular people, and actually building something as best as you can to achieve that, is what I would take away from that, rather than coming at it in terms of, I'm going to build this thing and it's going to do this and this for me. It's not really about you. It's about what are you doing for others? And then from that, you can really start to build something that others can get behind.
Wow, it's brilliant. Mo, thank you so much. It's been really insightful conversation. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. Thank you for coming along today.
Yeah, thank you very much for the invitation.
I'm sure we'll catch up again soon.
Very much so.
Awesome.
We hope that you liked the episode. This podcast was sponsored by QFind, a hiring platform that matches candidates with jobs and employers based on many factors that ensure longer-term alignment. It goes way beyond package and salaries and take into account much more than that to ensure a happy working environment for everybody. To find out more about this podcast and to see further releases, we'll be announcing them at the @qfinds.io Instagram page, as well as on the qfinds.io website, as well as from my own personal Instagram page and my own personal LinkedIn. All information you need that we spoke about in the podcast, or this information mentioned here, will be mentioned below in the description. So take a look, visit those links, and if you like anything or want to get in touch, please do. And lastly, stay tuned for more. Have an amazing week ahead of you.